What's up, guys? Today we're starting a new segment on this channel. I'm going to bring in people I look up to, and we're going to talk about everything from self-improvement, careers, and business. Today, our guest is someone I have not seen in a very long time. This man was a stellar soccer player when I last saw him, but now he's a martial artist in training, a neuroscience student at Tulane University, and he's also an EMT. Join me in welcoming Zunair Mohuddin.
Thank you very much, Akash. First of all, I just want to say it's great to see you after so long, and I appreciate the intro. It's really good.
Yeah, thanks for coming on. It's been a really long time. I think I last saw you in high school, probably.
Absolutely, it must have been like 3 or 4 good years.
Yeah, that was a while back. But yeah, I saw your post on Instagram about the 12 rules for life quote, and I was like, I have to get you on here because you seem to know a lot about self-improvement from watching Hamza and reading this book. Just from 5 minutes, like talking to you just before this, you were talking about one of the rules and gave a really in-depth explanation. So let's get right into it. Let's talk about 12 rules for life and self-improvement. So I guess everybody has their little story of why they got into self-improvement. So I guess the first question is, what made you want to pick up self-improvement and 12 rules for life specifically?
Okay, yeah. So in general, self-improvement, I would say started when I was very, very young compared to the modern 20, 21 years old. I started when I was getting into soccer, and I'm naturally very competitive about a lot of things. And I'd started playing soccer later compared to my counterparts, compared to my friends. I'd started super late. And so I realized that the only way I was going to be able to be even a half decent soccer player was going to be if I start improving myself and I start improving faster than everybody else is improving. So I sort of came across this genre of the internet, and it was just super young at the time. And it was like, what can I do to be the best version of myself? Talking about a growth mindset. And then everybody who I looked up to had seemed to talk about this book, 12 Rules for Life. And I had heard a lot about Jordan Peterson as well. So I picked it up and I gave it a read, and I really liked it. I really enjoyed it. So yeah.
Yeah, that's really cool. Sports seems to inspire a lot of people. We have an episode coming up where we're talking about NBA sports stories and getting into legends like Bill Russell, Kobe Bryant, and people like that. So your story seems very similar, although maybe that's not the place that you're trying to go. You're trying to get into neuroscience, and that's a lot about how the brain works, and self-improvement has a lot to do with that. So what got you into Jordan Peterson as a whole and his content?
So when you'd go on YouTube, you'd scroll and it would be in your recommended, it would be a lot of simple advice where it'd be like Jordan Peterson, or it'd be like a Navy SEAL, Jocko Willink, and you talk about clean your room and make your bed in the morning. And I was like, these things are so obvious and intuitive, but I don't do them. When I was watching these videos, my room wasn't clean, my bed wasn't made. And I was like, can I, as Jordan Peterson puts it, what are the small things that I can change, that I should change, that I could change, right? What are the small things that maybe it's not the biggest deal in the world to clean your room or organize your bed or put your books up, but doing it is better than nothing. It's starting you on that upward trajectory towards becoming the best version of yourself. So the internet really for me.
Yeah, I think these days, social media, the internet, there's a lot of positive things. There's also a lot of negative things, but as long as we focus on what we can do, what we are able to control, we're set for a proper path. So I guess let's break down some of the rules. What's your personal favorite rule? We'll start with that.
Sure. So I think my favorite rule, and the one that aligns most with my philosophy, is the rule that says, set your house in order before you criticize the world. I think it's very common and very popular nowadays. This young activist type space where everybody believes they can change the world, or these problems going on in these other countries or at the national level, but these people's mental health isn't right, or their physical health isn't right, or their individual lives are not the best version of themselves, and yet they look to change the world. And I think it's baffling. I think it shows the impact that social media has made on our outlook of the world, where I, as a young 21-year-old, instead of putting my family in order and being the best son I can be or the best brother I can be, I'm looking to see what I can do for X country or Y country when my house isn't in order. So that's my favorite rule.
Yeah, that's a lot of good stuff. I personally hadn't thought of that when I was reading about the rule. So that definitely opened my eye to something new. My favorite rule is rule 7: pursue something that's meaningful, not what's expedient. Mostly because during COVID, I found myself playing video games or just watching YouTube endlessly. And a lot of times we get caught up in like watching self-improvement videos a lot. And I gave myself the illusion that I was actually doing work when I actually wasn't really doing work.
Mhm.
And I think pursuing those meaningful things is something that it's easy for a college student to ignore. A lot of college students get caught up in hookup culture, drugs, alcohol, all that kind of stuff. And it's really easy because once you get into college, everybody's doing it. So choosing the path of most resistance is the way to go. And it's really hard to do. So what would you recommend as a fourth year college student now? How would somebody be able to assimilate into such a college culture where there's a lot of toxicity, and it's really hard to be your own person and work towards your purpose when there's so many distractions and instant gratifications?
So I have a two-pronged answer for this. The first one is about the real distractions like the parties and the drinking and the drugs and the hookup culture and all that stuff. And I would say for at least some of this stuff, like the partying, especially when you're young, don't be afraid to like don't shelter yourself from it because inside you're gonna create this tension, this this odds with yourself where part of you wants to do it and part of you doesn't want to do it. If you go out and have a little bit of fun, maybe you'll realize, like I did, that I was a morning person. So I didn't even like going out and having like I like hanging out with my friends in the mornings. And like by 6 p.m., my brain's completely shut down. And that's something that I learned about myself. And then the other side of that is that I think that my biggest vice and a lot of advice for like a lot of college students happens to be their phones. Like I'm just constantly scrolling,
Yeah,
constantly
yeah,
scrolling.
for sure.
And a lot of people say like delete social media or delete things, and that's great. But I think that one small shift that I've made that has been super helpful for me is if you have an iPhone and you
Yeah,
go in settings and you go to color filters and change your phone to black and white,
yeah,
now all the specific colors and like the colors that trick your brain into clicking and into getting involved, those colors, that feature of your brain turns off. So it's
mhm,
almost like reading a newspaper on your phone where you open up your phone and normally you scroll and go on Instagram or whatever, but when it's black and white, it's not nearly as appealing. So
yeah.
I would recommend that for a young student who's struggling with using his phone too much.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I think I might start implementing that because I find myself a lot of times using my phone maybe 3 to 4 hours a day, and that really multiplies. And it's not that I'm not being productive. It's like during work, if I'm just like bored and need a break, I'm going on my phone, and then it becomes like from 10 minutes to 15 minutes to like 20 minutes. And the screen time thing, it's there, but like it's so easy to add 15 more minutes, right? Um, so yeah, that's a really um good thing, and I'll try to implement it too. Another rule you were talking about was tell the
So
truth or at least don't lie. So could you expand on that a little more?
yeah, so I think that nowadays, and I'm sure this has been true for all of humanity, but we tell ourselves these little lies. And I didn't even really realize it until reading the book. But like if somebody would ask me, what are you doing today? I would, to sound cool, I'd say, oh, I'm doing this or I'm doing this. And that would sound really cool. But then they'd be like, okay, then why don't you come out with me instead? Because it's not that
Yeah,
productive. Really, I was sitting at home being a nerd and doing my work. But
yeah,
I felt embarrassed to tell the truth. And because of that, the problem had compounded and I had to make up another lie as to
yeah,
why I couldn't come out.
yeah,
And this is true for with your friends or with interpersonal relationships with your family or with other people. For me, that rule has been about tell the truth, especially when it's uncomfortable.
yeah,
Telling people what they about yourself or about them that maybe they don't want to hear, but is important for them to hear, or you truly believe about them. And then that way, if they have an issue or if I have an issue, then we can negotiate it, work it out. But telling the truth, especially when, not especially when, but telling the truth or at least don't lie, that rule has sort of helped me to see that conflict, being conflict averse is not helping anybody. And in fact,
yeah.
it's creating problems that will compound over time. Whereas telling the truth, even if it's hard now, makes it better for everyone.
Yeah, that's so true. I find myself telling myself lies sometimes, and Peterson talks about that a lot. Like we tell ourselves that we're doing work. As I talked about during COVID, I was watching these YouTube videos, telling myself I was doing self-improvement, but I'm not. I'm just watching YouTube videos. I'm lying to myself. Um, and I think another good rule that I learned more recently is during the workforce. I'm on co-op right now, by the way. So it's like a 6-month internship that Northeastern provides us. And rule number 10, be precise in your speech. That rule really resonated with me because a lot of times I would get these tasks and I would miss one just because I didn't talk about it enough or ask a question about it and I didn't communicate. And a lot of times relationships fold under this non-communication and missing certain things in things that people say.
Exactly. This is true even in like smaller settings, like asking questions in class. But if you don't jump into the embarrassment of raising your hand and asking a question, then you miss the topic and you get it wrong in the test or the exam, or you miss it for the future. But when you jump into that fear of not even confrontation, really, it's just asking a question or clarifying something that somebody else may have said because they're just a person too.
Yeah.
Communication definitely opens doors. I mean, absolutely.
Yeah, for sure. And I think another rule, treat yourself like someone you're responsible for helping, is really important too, because a lot of times we beat ourselves up when we're not doing well in class or in sports or any activity that we're in. And yeah, do you have anything to add on to that rule?
Yeah, I would actually give the opposite side of that as well. Or sometimes we give ourselves too much credit, right? Where if I did and I wanted that kid to succeed, I wouldn't just say, good job, you did great. I would be like, could you have done better? And I give myself a lot of slack, or I'll often say like, oh, I did a great job when I could have done better. And for a lot of people, I mean, it just depends on your self-esteem level, right? If you're somebody that neglects yourself and fails to give yourself credit a lot of time, then that rule helps to reverse that. And you start giving yourself more credit as if you're like raising yourself up. And if you're somebody like me who is quick to give myself credit for things, it helps you see that you did well, but you could have done better.
Yeah, that's true. I think our ego gets in the way a lot of times, and that's what has come up in a lot of the books I've been reading. There's this book called Think Like a Monk by Jay Shetty, and in that he talks about one whole chapter is letting go of your ego. And I think if you haven't read that, you should give that a try.
Put on the list.
Yeah, and your ego really gets in the way of a lot of these rules, from rule number 8, like telling the truth or don't lie, or pursuing what's meaningful instead of what's expedient, setting your house in perfect order before criticizing other people. A lot of times we criticize like the outside world, like politicians and billionaires, millionaires, for having all this money and doing certain things, but we don't know what perspective they're coming from. And we should make sure that like we're all set before talking about other people in a negative way. And a lot of that stems from rule number 1, stand up straight with your shoulders back, because throughout all these challenges, we gotta stand up and face these challenges head on. So yeah, what do you think about rule number 1?
So initially I thought that was one of those, those pickup artists, stand up straight, have posture, fake it till you make it. When Dr. Peterson explains the neurochemistry behind it and why it works, why it creates a positive feedback loop with your endorphins and your dopamine systems and your serotonin, helps you to feel better, and then you stand up straighter, and then feel better, and then stand up straighter. And as you feel better, these signals are transmitted to everybody else. This is not in a vacuum. So the other people around you, when he talks about the lobsters, the other lobsters in the tank see it too, that you're somebody worth taking care of. And then when you take care of yourself, then you do better. And so slowly you build upon that self and basically put yourself in an upward spiral. And you improve your life just by standing up straighter. So, I love that rule, and I think about it all the time when I'm slumped over, when my posture is bad. I think about it all the time.
Yeah, a lot of times in self-improvement, we get into the cycle of like doing something that we regret and then going into self-improvement again, and then it works for a few months or maybe a year, and then we get back into the cycle again by doing something that we regret. So how would you suggest like we could get out of this cycle and sort of move forward?
So I think there's 2 types of people. There's a type of person that can just cut out bad habits like smoking or whatever. Some people can just cut it out cold turkey and just stop. Then a lot of people, and for that group of people, I recommend just stop. If you have the ability to do so, stop now. Save yourself. But the other group of people I would recommend is track how many times you do that bad habit in a week. Let's say 5 times a week. Right. And this is for any bad habit. We all know all the habits that we have. And then try to beat that the next week. So try to do 4 times next week, or try to do 3 times next week, and then slowly phase it out of your repertoire of things you do. Or what I like to say is I like to like if there's a bad habit you have, you make it a reward for yourself, right? So I'm like, I have a major sweet tooth. I love eating dessert. It
Yeah.
gets in the way of like staying in shape and having a physique that you're proud of. But what I'll do is I'll say, okay. And this also goes back to the rule where he talks about treating yourself like somebody responsible for helping, right?
Yeah.
So if you're responsible for helping somebody else get in shape and they have a problem with desserts, you don't just tell them to cut it off immediately. You say, hey,
Yeah.
if you go work out, you can have a little bit. Or if you do a hard workout, or if you do your hill sprints, or if you go to your MMA practice, then you can go have, a donut or whatever it is. But
Yeah.
that second rule also applies a lot there, where it's be compassionate enough with yourself to give yourself a reward if you've done something hard.
Yeah. That's really cool. I love how all these rules tie into each other. At the end, he gives a really good conclusion of all the rules that you can apply with different things and different aspects of your life. And another one of those rules is what we were talking about earlier. Rule number 3, make friends with people who want the best for you. And I think that's really important in college, because in high school, we're sort of set with these friends. There, we had like 100 kids in our high school classes or high school grades, and now in college we have a vast like majority of like our grade is like 400 or 500 at least, maybe thousands of people. So yeah, how would you suggest making friends in college for a freshman coming in?
Yeah, so coming into college, you and I must have both had this culture shock where we came from a
Yeah.
very small school and
Yeah.
sort of got dropped into this school where people don't know each other as well as they did back when we were
Yeah.
at Hayes Academy.
Yeah.
And so for me, it was about finding hobbies that I would do even if I didn't have any friends. And then I
Yeah.
would meet friends along the way. So I was someone who got into MMA or soccer. And so I'd go to these events, these MMA events or these soccer events, and then I'd meet like-minded people who already, they were clearly there because they wanted to improve themselves. And if
Yeah.
you want to improve yourself and I want to improve myself, we're both going up, right?
Yeah.
So finding something, and this is what I say for people who are in relationships as well and can't figure out where to meet people in that regard, as opposed to just making friends, but do something that you would do even if you're alone.
Okay.
Right? And then
Yeah.
meet people along the way.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I think the mistake I made during college was also partially because of COVID, but I think like that was just an excuse I use sometimes to accommodate for that. But I think like the disease was, or the virus was a really big threat at that time. So coming to Boston during that time was really interesting because my best friend was probably like my roommate, and I only saw him like a few times in the day because like we had classes and different activities. So I think that's one mistake I made in freshman year, that I would just stay in my room and sort of explore my hobbies on my own instead of joining groups that I could elevate myself in those hobbies with. So yeah, I think that's a really important rule too. Another thing, I guess, this was one rule that I couldn't really relate to because I guess I'm not a parent, but rule 5, do not let your children do anything that makes you dislike them. I understand where that's coming from, but if you could elaborate on that, go ahead.
Yeah. So there's a concept in therapy and in psychology about reparenting yourself or taking another look at your parents and
Yeah.
giving them, I said compassion already, but being compassionate to them as though they were people who were trying their best to make you the best version of yourself. But
Yeah.
along the way, as people do, made mistakes.
Yeah.
And so this rule has been about figuring out what I do or treating myself as the child in the equation and also
Yeah.
as the parent, right? So kind of parenting myself again and seeing what holes do I have that make people not like me? Or what
Yeah.
holes do I have that negatively impact me in the way that the world sees me? And then what can I do to fix it? What can I do to reparent myself in a way? And then the second part of that has been thinking about the fact that my parents didn't have this book when they
Yeah.
were raising me 20 years ago. They were sort of just doing it on the fly as most parents do. And so
Yeah.
this rule has been about looking at my own life and saying, 1, how can I reparent myself? And 2, how can I be compassionate to my parents who tried their best?
Yeah.
It's been about seeing them as people.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I think a lot of times we criticize our parents for the way they raised us, but they didn't have the resources that we do today. We have the internet, we have social media, we have books like this, we have YouTube, which has all these great philosophers of our time, I guess. And another thing that Dr. Peterson has been getting is criticism for this rule because it has a few controversial parts to it. But that's rule number 11: do not bother children when they're skateboarding. In rule number 11, he talks about how society is putting down strong men because of certain reasons.
Sure, sure. So I think this perversion of masculinity, or the kind of brush around we're doing of it, where we're finding these people who have some of that masculine spirit left, and then we're clamping on them for dear life because we sorely missed it in our households or in our lives. Where, I mean, growing up in Desi families,
Yeah.
where the mom's the boss and it's just normal,
Yeah.
and there's nothing wrong with that. But having a strong male leader as a young man to look up to, whether that's your parents or your uncle, or even now the kids coming up are going to be looking up to Andrew Tate in that regard, where
Yeah.
finding a guy who's not afraid to say what he truly believes, and finding
Yeah.
a guy who embodies that masculine spirit of knowing what he wants and saying it, even
Yeah.
if even if other people disagree, and being comfortable with that space of disagreement. So I think, as far as like masculinity is concerned, and the masculinity crisis, I think that's the biggest obstacle to overcome, is going to be
Yeah.
that young men finding the ability to be comfortable in disagreement.
Yeah, I think this rule is also about taking risks. As a child, we don't really care about, like, when we're learning to walk. If we fall down, we just get back up and start walking again. I think that's something that as we get older, we're taught: don't take risks, stay safe, have these safe jobs. A lot of times, like my parents or a lot of Desi parents would say, like, become a doctor, engineer, or a lawyer, or else forget about anything else. So, like, that creates really toxic culture as you're growing up, and especially as like college students when we're trying to decide what we're doing. So I'd say, like, this rule helped me realize that it's okay for me to take risks. It's okay for me to start a YouTube channel where I talk to random people and try to become a better version of myself. So yeah, I actually love this rule, even though it's like has some controversial parts, but that was the main take I got from that rule. And then finally, there's rule 12: pet a cat on the street when you encounter one. What's your take on that? I think it's all about gratitude and thankfulness, but yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, sure. So I think a lot of times in our lives we focus on looking up, and we talk about becoming the best versions of ourselves, and that's important, and reaching for the stars. But then we don't look at where we are now and how blessed we are to be alive, and not be born as a bug, or not be born as another animal, or
Yeah,
being grateful for what we've been given. Because a lot of times when we get in this mindset of self-improvement, go, 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 go,
yeah,
we stop and like don't stop to smell the flowers, or we don't appreciate what we have and appreciate what's been given to us. We could be
yeah,
born in 1200s Mongolia, and Genghis Khan is burning our village down, but instead,
yeah,
we're comfortable and we're living life, and it's important to be grateful. And then also, like in my personal life, I'm very scared of dogs and cats. Like, I'm just
yeah.
uncomfortable around them. And
Mhm.
so we had like a couple cats on campus at Tulane, and so I took the opportunity, and I faced my fears and actually pet a cat after reading this book. And so this rule, in a personal way, was also about overcoming a fear.
Yeah,
So
yeah. I think it is about like overcoming fears and being grateful for the small things you have in life. I think I was reading in Think Like a Monk that essentially Shetty, he had a path that he would take when he was at the ashram. He was living as a monk for 3 years, and their job was to find a new rock on the way to the temple every single day. And that way they were able to be thankful for each new rock that they found. So we can start doing that in the little things in our life, where if we see like a new car come by that's pretty cool, we can be thankful for it. If there's a different dog on the street today, or a different person on the street that we might know or we might want to know, then it's okay to go and ask them or talk to them. And I think that sums up most of the rules. I think we have rule number 4 left: compare yourself to who you were yesterday, not to who somebody else is today. I think that one, it sort of meant a lot to me because I found myself in high school comparing myself to other people in my grade and even grades above me and below me. I kept comparing myself to other people. And one thing I need to learn to live with is, especially after graduation, a pandemic levels everyone and everybody's just at home. So that would define what I actually do, because I shouldn't be comparing myself to other people. What am I going to do now that I'm presented a new problem? And yeah, what's your take on rule number 4?
So I have two differing opinions on rule number 4.
Yeah.
The first one I agree, and the first one I disagree. So in the second one I disagree. But the first one is also really got impacted by the pandemic, where everybody was in a period of solitude.
Mm-hmm.
And so in periods like that, it's really important to look back at your past self and look forward at your future self and say, hey, I've done all this growth and I can continue to do more growth, and I'm grateful for that. But the point that I disagree with about is that I do think that in life, especially in the times we're living, there are a lot of zero-sum games. There are a lot of games where some people are winners and some people are losers.
Yeah.
And when this comes to either resource accumulation or finding the best friends in your life or finding the best partners or things like that, there is competition going on.
Yeah.
So I do push back on that rule in some regard, in the fact that there are some things that only one person can have, or there are some things where we're going to have to compete. And so partially I really like the rule because it helps me to become a better version of myself and remember that that's my ultimate goal. But partially but remember that other people are also trying to improve themselves. And if there's a small amount of resources you're fighting for, you have to be willing to conquer them.
Yeah.
That's what MMA has taught me a lot about, which is that there are winners and there are losers.
Yeah.
And being the best version of yourself is great, but when it's time to go compete, it's time to go compete.
Yeah. I think we learned that in watching and following sports a lot. A lot of times, maybe the best player doesn't win the whole tournament because of certain things, because maybe he's not the best leader. Maybe there's that area that he needs to get better at. There's always the edge that kind of you should have. And that's what the Mamba mentality and what Kobe Bryant was so respected for, because he was always having that edge. He would trick people into coming to practice late so that he could get there earlier and practice an hour earlier. So I think that sums up most of the rules, and a lot of them can just be summed up to live a good life. And how would you sum up these 12 rules if you only had like one rule?
It would be become somebody that you are proud of. Because I think a lot of times in life, that would be the rule, but I think a lot of times in life, we use other people's standards to define our own success, right?
Yeah.
We use school standards of the grading system, or we use our parents' standards of be a doctor, be an engineer. But
yeah,
ultimately, when I see other people who are doctors, I'm like, that's cool.
Yeah.
That's interesting. But it's not like that's the best possible thing this person could have done. And so part of me is becoming the person that I think is the best in the world. Go be that. In whatever series of attributes or traits or accomplishments that is, be that person. Be somebody you're proud of.
Yeah, I think that's really important. Being somebody you're proud of. That's a great rule. You should add that. Email Dr. Peterson and tell him to add that. He also came out with a new book recently, Beyond Order. I don't know if you gotten the chance to read it. Yeah, me neither. But it has 12 more rules. It seems a little more dense, so I didn't get to read it. But I guess this book sums up a lot of the things that we as college students can do in our lives to have a successful college career and also like a successful life in our 20s and 30s and so on. So what would you say to a younger brother of yours that's trying to come up and he's just gotten into self-improvement? He still has some bad habits that he's stuck to and is having a hard time with those bad habit addictions, and he's trying to get better. He has a good moral path, but he's just not quite there yet. So what would you say to the Jeffreys of the world?
To the Jeffreys of the world, I would say this: find a way to grade yourself. So I have my own grading system. I have 5 different attributes, and then I score them out of 5 for myself. And then every couple of months, I'll come and look back at it and see if I've earned points or lost points. So these 5 attributes are wealth, status, physique, charisma, and style. Mm-hmm. And these are the 5 attributes that I want to optimize. Then I have in my notes app, I have like a scoring out of 5 for myself for all of the attributes. And so to a younger version of myself, I would say be brutally honest with yourself and see where you rank on these attributes, or make your own attributes. Yeah. And then when you do that, use these as your guideline to improve and become the best version of yourself. And for me, if I had 5 out of 5 in all of those things, that would be my ideal scenario. That would be the person I'm looking at. So figure out your attributes, 1, and 2, grade yourself, and then 3, work to maximize those.
Yeah, that's great. I think while doing that, I would add, keep these rules in mind, because it's easy when you're ranking yourself to lie to yourself. It's easy to compare yourself to other people instead of focusing on your own standards for yourself. And I think that's really important and really good. I think that's all for 12 rules for life. But do you have any closing remarks or anything you would want to say?
No, yeah, absolutely. I would love to say that as we leave this conversation, I'd like to say that doing something is better than doing nothing, and looking to improve and just having an optimistic attitude about your own personal outcome will be the number one determining factor on whether or not you live a life that you're proud of. Do the best you can, do the best for yourself, and create a version of yourself that you're proud of. Everything is malleable. That's what I'd say.
Yeah, that's amazing. Thank you so much for being on here. It really inspired me, and I would love to have you on here again. If you have any topics in mind, DM, you have my number.
Yeah,
you can tell me anytime. We got the first podcast video recorded, and we're gonna keep going. We're gonna keep striving to beat Adonis. If you guys haven't seen Hamza, go watch him.
Go watch Hamza. Go watch Hamza.
Yeah, go watch Hamza. He's great, man. He's very authentic. That's what I like about him. He's very like true, and a lot of self-improvement people, they can be a little devious at times, a little like showing illusion they're trying to sell something or something that they have. But I like Hamza because he's very honest and true to the point. But yeah, thanks for coming on, and thank you everybody for watching, and we'll see you guys next time.